Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Eagles chat video, the New Mexico chat. So, what we have in store tonight, Eagles starting to kick off the season against our arch rivals, the Dallas Cowboys. Kind of going to be an interesting way to start the year. Um, I think the Birds are in a pretty good shape, but I think there's some surprise predictions coming from me tonight or today. So let's get started and talk about the Birds. So let's forget everything you know and let's think about being realistic, being objective. I'm not going to sensationalize things for you. I'm wearing my Super Bowl T-shirt. Hey, they're unveiling the banner tonight. Some controversy about whether or not the player should be on the field for that, but I see the point of moving on, and we're not defending anything. We got to go out and win a championship for 2025. So, where do they play? They're at the Link tonight. It's kicking off pretty late. Although the great thing about here in New Mexico is by the time this game's over, I'll still be in bed by 9:30, 10 o'clock New Mexico time instead of 11:30 or midnight. There on the East Coast. Some roster insights. We had some big changes in the past week. Brought back Burton McCovey. That's pretty exciting. I think he's a better punt returner. Also allows us to save DeJean just for defense. Um, We'll also talk about some position comparisons between the Eagles and the Cowboys tonight, and then we'll talk about some predictions and some key matchups. We all know what some of those are going to be. So let's get into it. I'm going to share a screen here. We're going to talk about the Birds, um, and kind of move on from there. Kind of exciting. Let's see. We're having a little bit of trouble here. Let's see. So, hey, we're the opposing team tonight is the Cowboys. So, recent performance in history. Let's talk about the Eagles' performance against the Cowboys recently. We've kind of dominated in the past few years, but we know Dak Prescott has a tendency to step it up against the Eagles and play pretty well. Tonight, there's enough questions on defense. Can Jalex Hunt and Nolan Smith play up to par and kind of get us off to a running start, getting pressure on Dak Prescott? Hopefully, and I'm assuming with that hamstring coming back from surgery, he's not going to be as mobile as he once was. Um, but I think that, the play of Dak is going to really dictate how this game goes for the Birds tonight. And of course, there's enough holes on the defense that had to be filled in the offseason, but I think we're pretty strong there. Jahad Campbell, Zach Bond, you know, I think the Eagles are going to have to rely on their running game. Jerry said that getting rid of Micah is going to make them a stronger running team. I doubt that that's true, um, because Kenny Clark's great, but I think I heard somewhere. I think it was on Stephen A. this morning. He was talking about him. He was only like the 80th ranked defensive tackle in the league. And as we know, the Eagles have two of the best defensive tackles in the league with Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Um, so offensively, I think key players for this on Dallas' side is going to be the player, the receivers, um, CD and Dak. Are they going to run the ball with the former Eagle Miles Sanders? That would be kind of interesting, him trying to run against the Birds defense. Then we'll also have to see how the Eagles' young defense plays on the other side of the ball. So I think the offense is there enough question marks that this could be either a blowout or a close game. I've seen everybody predicting both ways. So that kind of takes care of our dependencies there. Um, so what's the significance for the Eagles season? Hey, this is an NFC East matchup, so this gets you a conference win, this gets you a divisional win, this gives you a leg up in the division. Giants can be pretty scary this year, so getting off to the right start against the Cowboys can, significantly influence Eagles' momentum going forward. Also, they run that risk of, if the Eagles win, hey, it was great. It was great that they missed the banner ceremony. If the players come out for the banner ceremony and the Eagles lose, then it was like, oh, they were just focused on last year. So this is kind of a no-win situation for Sirianni. So I'm kind of feeling that he's making the right decision, holding the Eagles in the locker room while all the banner ceremony and stuff goes up. Also, this is, a crucial playoff position. And again, get you up a step in your division, get you an up a step in with a conference win. Those things all play a role later in the season when they start talking about the tiebreakers and whether or not you're a first seed or second seed if you had an identical record or something else. And I think team morale, I think, this boosts the fact that, hey, we are good. We have walked this walk before. We're going to continue this walk from last year. So Eagles roster insight. So what do we have on the roster to, I think things are going to look tight for the Birds at first. I think, new right guard. We'll have to see how Tyler Steen plays. Um, we all know that Hurts is awesome. We know that he's terribly underrated by those pundits around the NFL. So, those things don't really make that much of a difference to me. Um, Outstanding leadership on the Eagles, and I think is a big thing. Hurts can dominate there. He is the mouthpiece of what Sirianni says. We've heard that all off season. Everything from, hey, this is a new year to, in the locker room, this is what we're thinking, this is what we're feeling, this is how, you can't be great without the greatness of others. Him and Barkley talk about that all the time. Spewing that Sirianni adage out there. An offensive line, you have Mailata and Johnson, both named captains, big guys dominating up front. I think they're going to pull Tyler Steen along. We're going to also have to see how Landon Dickerson plays. How does that leg look after, it's been a month since he had that surgery, or right around 3 weeks. So how's he look tonight? Is he able to play left guard and play effectively? Or they to have to bring in Toth or Pryor or, the young kid. I can't remember his name. Um, but anyway, so an expected game performance, I expect the Eagles probably to throw for about 250 yards or 200 yards and run for about 150, 200 yards between Hurts and Barkley. I don't really see Dallas being able to stand up to the Eagles' run offense, especially with their defensive line. Kenny Clark wasn't much of a factor when the Eagles played the Packers. So I don't assume that he's going to be much of a factor tonight. If the Eagles stay in third and shorts, this game's going to be a wash. They'll just dominate with ball control throughout the night. Our offensive playmakers, wide receivers are impactor. You know, Granted, you know, CD will have, is going to challenge and Pickens is going to challenge the Eagles cornerback opposite Kenyon Mitchell, but I think that that's a big matchup to watch out for tonight. Kenyon, you know, does he shut down one of the other guys? Do they get enough pressure on Dak that, the corners are able to play well, the safeties? The other thing is Sidney Brown, what is he going to do at safety? Will the Eagles end up giving Makuba some snaps, which I hope they do? I think he showed himself to be a playmaker in the preseason. Running backs, the image I used on this picture on this slide, says it all. Saquon, him catching balls out of the backfield, being spelled by Shipley, being spelled by Dillon, I think will give him enough breaks that, we can keep him around 20, 25 carries, give the other guys 5 to 10 each. And the Eagles run game will just dominate tonight. That's what I'm looking to see happening. I'm more worried about that other corner position and what plays Dallas can do on offense. Brian Schottenheimer, smart guy, comes from a pretty good dad. His dad, Marty, I was a big fan of his when he was at Cleveland and with KC. So, I'm sure he learned a lot and can bring a lot to the Cowboys, but to shut down the Eagles' offensive weapons, I think is pretty much a done deal there. Defensively, Nolan Smith, I think he'll be back to par. I'm still a little worried about that torn tricep of his from the Super Bowl, but he played throughout the Super Bowl with that with one arm. However, he's had much longer to recuperate than BG did, and he was a little bit younger than BG. So hopefully he's ready to go with his and able to get through the season. I also think the Eagles defense will show strong ability to pressure Dak. At least chase him out of the pocket. I don't think he's going to be very comfortable running with the football tonight. So I think, effectively they can shut down the Dallas run game if they get enough pressure I mean, pass game if they get enough pressure, even if with the run game, especially if they take like the KC approach, where to use Rex Ryan's statement of they were playing the run on the way to the quarterback, and I think that's a little bit what we're going to see tonight. He's going to try. I think Dick's going to try to make uh, Dak get rid of the ball pretty quickly. Some defensive challenges, like I said, is that other cornerback, that QB2, CB2, opposite of Kenyon. Can Adoree Jackson hold up over there, or do they need to bring in Bennett, who they traded for? That other way, as Seth Joyner said on his show, strap it up, boys, because you're going to be challenged all night long. They're going to stay away from Kenyon, and they're going to come after those guys. Hopefully, we'll roll some coverage over there with Cooper. And bring up some safety play. I think that the Eagles are in for a dogfight. I mean, this is a divisional rival. It is a divisional challenge. If it's a whitewash tonight, I'll be really, really surprised. But I think the Eagle defense, I'm seeing somewhere around like 28-27 for this game, 20, on offense. So maybe giving up 17 to 20 points. By comparison, quarterback, I give the slight edge here to, I mean, I know people are going to give the edge to Dak Prescott. I don't think so. And that's because we just don't know what he is after his hamstring injury. We really, really don't. Experience levels, I think Eagles a little young on the defensive side of the ball. Dallas is such an unknown because, Eberflus as their new defensive coordinator. They probably look back a little bit at what the Bears did, some pressure and things there. The Eagles did play the Bears while Eberflus was coach there, so we'll have to see. And like I said, Brian Schottenheimer's a total unknown on the other side of the ball. The Eagles also have some questions on the offensive side of the ball. Patullo, this is his first game actually calling plays outside of the preseason where you're pretty vanilla. So things can go a little bit differently there. Overall impact on the game outcome, I think it's going to be the Eagle offensive line. Do they dominate that Dallas offensive line? It's kind of a relief Micah's not over there on that other side. Some of the highlights they kept showing after he got traded was him sacking Hurts or tackling Hurts on a run or Barkley on a run. So, I think the biggest impact on this game is going to come from the Eagles, the front line, and whether or not they can get pressure from Hunt and Smith and what that other corner does. For Dallas, I think it's going to be shutting down the Eagle receivers. That adage of, well, if you shut down the running game, the pass game can't beat you. And you saw what that did to Kansas City in the Super Bowl. Eagles just kind of dominated there. So I don't really see these big, I don't see what the other pundits are seeing, at least not on my experience, not what I've watched of the Birds over the years. I really think this team's pretty stacked. I think they're going to be pretty tough. And their overall impact on the game, again, going to be the Eagles' front line, offensive line, defensive line. Will they dominate the line of scrimmage? And can they cover up for having a weak corner over on the other side? If they can't, I really see the Gene being moved to that CB2, and then they'll put like Adoree Jackson or somebody else in that nickel spot, which may be a better spot for Jackson or Bennett. So, but we'll have to see. I mean, everything's going to play out tonight. It's a new season. You never know how things are going to go. I also have concerns if Hurts gets injured in this game at all. The Eagles really don't have a CB quarterback 2 right now, with Tanner being out. But Hal has played well, and he played well against the Eagles when he was with Washington. So we'll have to see how that works out as well. But hopefully this whole season doesn't come down to that and get Hurts for 16 or 17 games. Hopefully about 16. That way the Eagles have the division wrapped up at the end of the year. So wide receivers, running backs, edge here. I'm going to go slightly with an edge here to the Cowboys, but the big thing there is, Pickens like to take plays off. And I can see that happening against the Eagles. He's not a guy who likes to practice. He's not a guy who likes to play hard, which is why the Steelers got rid of him. But No, I'm just kidding. I'm going with that with the Eagles here. Devonta and AJ, um, and Dallas and Johan Dotson. I think the Eagles front, four main receivers are top of the line. Running backs and the versatility of those running backs, I think edge definitely to the Eagles. How do you go against Saquon? Comparing positions overall, I would focus on the receivers, route running, things like that. CD is mainly a deep threat. I don't see him. He's not a great route runner. He's a guy who's going to get open. He's going to move around a lot. AJ is one of the best route runners, especially against man-to-man coverage, and Devonta can beat anybody and beat him deep. He runs precise routes. So you got to go with the birds there. The other thing with Saquon, again, he's quick, he's cuts, he runs, and when he gets in the open field, nobody's catching him from behind. Miles Sanders can do that a little bit. We saw that when he was with the Eagles. He was Saquon's backup at Penn State, for what that's worth. Um, but he is pretty quick. So the Eagle defense can't rest on him tonight. I know Dallas also has a couple other backs in the fold besides him, but I think Sanders is their best bet, in my opinion. So let's see. Defensive line, like I said, giving the edge there to the Eagles. Dallas's is a complete unknown. Their total defense is a complete unknown. But we know what the impact of the Eagles front four will be. Jalex Hunt is the wild card there, first time starter opposite Nolan Smith. Like I said, for me, Nolan Smith's tricep that has got to hold up through the whole season. Like I said, he's younger than BG, so I think that that's important there. And I also think that's the Eagles' vulnerability. Can they keep these guys healthy with that big rotation that Vic likes to bring in on defense? So my predictions and key matchups, offensive, I look for the Eagles to run the ball 30 times a game. Even if Saquon doesn't break one, I still see the Eagles running the ball about 30 times a game, passing about 20, 25, pretty balanced. I think Dallas is going to rely heavily on the pass. You don't go out and get Pickens and team him up with CD and run the ball. So I see that being a little different. And I also see them getting behind early, so they're going to have to pass a lot more. Defensively, Eagles pressure up front, linebackers stout with Campbell and Vaughn. And when Trotter Jr. is in the game, I think, even if it goes into something with like three linebackers and stuff like that, I think that, defensively, the Eagles are going to be able to shut them down with pressure. The Eagles front seven, and to me, is no concern really. Even though I have some reservations, but it's really not a concern. I think the biggest concern for me with the Eagles is Sidney Brown and then Dory Jackson starting in the secondary. You don't lose guys like Slay and stuff and just kind of continue as is. So I'd be really, really surprised there. And, Fangio is one of the best at making changes on the fly. Eagles are in the second year of his defense. Most of the starters are there from before, or at least guys who have played in that defense. So I don't see, a bunch of weaknesses coming from there. But I do see, like I said, I'm still worried about those two defensive back positions. For Dallas, like I said, I think they're going to try to throw early and often. I don't see them running the ball a whole lot, even though Schottenheimer is known for running the ball, but he also likes to use a lot more motion and things like that. Defensively, like I said, Dallas is a total unknown. They really are. So defensively, it's hard to tell what they're going to do to try to shut the Eagles down. But I imagine they're probably going to show a lot of seven-man fronts. They're going to try to shut Saquon down and force Hurts to beat them deep, which is what's going to happen because Devonta and AJ will get deep or Goddard will be out in the flat somewhere open. And then we'll also have to see how well that Dallas does, in-game adjustments. That's another unknown when you're playing against a coach who doesn't really have any history as a head coach. You got to look more back at his offensive coordinator days. So big players I expect to make a difference tonight is the big man right there, Jalen Carter. I think he's just going to take over the Dallas front line and dominate. I'd be really surprised if he doesn't play a big role at some point in the game with like a turnover, forced fumble, something like that. Also, other players that I think they're going to be a big impact is, how's Cooper DeJean going to look in his second year? How's Kenyon going to look in his second year? Usually defensive backs don't fall off in their play. We usually see that more with quarterbacks and receivers. And then, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas, I think they're the big keys to the Eagles. Up front, the Eagle offensive line, are they going to dominate? Those are players that I expect to have some sort of significant impact tonight. The way Zach Bond was playing down the stretch last year, getting a bunch of turnovers, whether it was fumble recoveries or interceptions, I could see, him getting a turnover tonight, but we'll have to see with that. You know, Sometimes those things are left in the previous season, and we'll have to go from there. So outcomes, score projections. Outcomes, I see the big win here being for the Eagles, and I'm also seeing a score something like 27-28 to 20-24. I really think Dallas is going to get their share of points tonight. It's always hard a little bit in the to tell what a defense is going to do, and I really think they're going to go after Jackson and Bennett tonight. So I think that it's going to be a little bit tighter score than most people want. I know if you watch Stephen A. Smith this morning, he was touting an Eagle blowout. I doubt that's going to happen. I see a much tighter game. I see Dak playing well, unless the Eagles get a ton of pressure on him. And I see the Eagles getting a ton of pressure on him, seeing what he can do on that leg. Is it as recovered as he thinks it is? Can he run like he did before? Usually guys coming off big injuries like that struggle a little bit the next season, or at least in the early part of the season. And it's just going to be interesting to see what Dallas looks like without Micah Parsons on their defense. So it could either be, a paper wall defense by Dallas, or who knows, maybe they will play a little bit better knowing that everybody's got to step up. But, I don't look for this to be a blowout. I look for it to be a usual Eagles Dallas tight game all the way to the end. Somebody will have the ball, there at the end. I'm looking at it, like I said, 28-24 is probably a more realistic score. And then, scenarios that could affect the final of the game, turnovers, of course, are always the big thing. That's the one stat in the NFL that's pretty assured. If, you turn it over more than your opponent, you're going to lose. And, that's the one thing with the Eagles. They don't turn it over much. That's been a knock on Hurts. That was a knock on Hurts at the beginning of last season, and then he eliminated his turnovers. So that's, see where he's at with that. But if the Eagles come out of this turnover free, then maybe there's a little bigger score. But again, 28-24 is what I'm seeing at the end here. So conclusion, exciting contest, lots of key factors, turnovers, players, stepping up. The unknown on the Eagles defense, the unknown of the Dallas defense, so there's a lot that's going to come out and help us try to figure out what's going on here. So you all have a great night. Enjoy the game, and we'll fly Eagles fly. So if you like the video, hit like and subscribe, and we'll have a new one next week. We're also working on getting one done for a full season overview, full season of planning. I know I hit on a few games at a time prior to this video, but we're going to go back and look at each one, and we're going to look at the entire schedule. We're going to make predictions on multiple NFL teams moving forward. So have a great day. Fly Eagles fly.